channel. My name's James, this is CJ, and we're going to be talking everything bowling on this channel. One of the most asked topics over the last 24 to 48 hours concerns what's going on with the inspection of urethane balls at the US Open this year. Today I will explain this issue, try to give you some insights on what's going on, why there's an issue, and what you can possibly do to mitigate some of this. Urethane and polyurethanes are chemicals that are used in a wide range of products that you use every day. In many cases, urethane and polyurethane act identical in many cases, in many use cases, and so they're usually talked about as being interchangeable with very few exceptions. For bowling's use case, they would be mostly interchangeable. They have the same or similar hardness, resistance to cracking, durability, absorption rates, etc., etc., etc. So for the bowling universe, they would be similar enough to not have any real distinction. For this particular use, the hardness of urethane balls are in question. This is what USBC is talking about checking the hardness, is that right now it's in question about what's going on with these balls. USBC has a set of standards, and those standards are going to be listed, are going to be linked to below, of all of a ball that is certified. However, it's generally only tested for about 20 days, give or take, before being certified by the governing body. This gives an initial approval that the ball meets the minimum specifications that USBC has set. Now, you can imagine that this has some issues when it comes to long term. USBC, from my understanding, and when I've spoken with folks at USBC, is that the testing continues on and on and on at USBC headquarters. They do spot checks and spot tests to see if there's any problems with that. You may have remember back when Motive had a small issue that they had to recall some balls and change them and stuff like that. But that's because USBC continues to test throughout. Now, as these tests go on, sometimes something will pop up. It's rare, as you can tell, as you will know. It's very rare for this kind of stuff to happen. And it's usually involved one manufacturer. Well, apparently this involves more than one manufacturer. It involves an entire class of balls. That's the reason why they're saying they're going to test all urethane balls. And that's specifically because urethane seems to be having this problem, and they're unsure of exactly what's causing the problem. We are going to do a little speculation from here on out. What I'm talking about, some of it will be fact, some of it will be speculation on what I think is going on with this from a chemical standpoint. For this particular issue, hardness of urethane balls are in question, and they're in question because of how USBC tests urethane balls, or all balls in general. The urethane, all balls have a minimum hardness of 72 on the Durameter D scale. There are different scales on this Durameter testing platform, but there are this scale that USBC uses is called the D scale, and this is tested on an average of 10 spots on any submitted ball for testing. This set of circumstances are the main issue. The fact that they're only capable of testing for 20 days because, quite simply, USBC doesn't, USBC and ball manufacturers don't want prolonged testing because the balls would never get to you. It would take years and years and years to test what will happen to these balls over what some people keep their balls for 10 years, some people keep them for a year or two, and then they're disposed of, or they go to a different ball. But testing for all those scenarios would take forever, and it is cost prohibitive, and just quite frankly, USBC probably is doing the right thing by not testing for years and years and doing spot checks here and there. As I've covered in previous videos, these cover stock materials change over time. They change due to exposure to the environment, temperatures, use of different cleaning solutions and chemicals, and even have sunlight, and even sunlight and UV can have some effect on specific type of materials. While urethane is resistant to these exposures, it is not impervious to these things. There's a difference between resistance and impervious. Resistance means that, essentially means that over time, these things can soften or harden or change because the chemicals inside of these, while stable, are not stable forever. They decay over time. Everything does. And overuse, we use oils. Those oils are general mineral oils, and these are organic compounds that they're using in bowling balls, especially urethane. These are organic compounds that can have a long-term exposure to light, and other chemicals can change them over time. Now, they're resistant to it, meaning that they'll try to not change, but eventually everything changes. So, and the urethane is no different. While the hardening of urethane poses a cracking threat, the softening of urethane poses an out of USBC spec threat. That's the issue that USBC is looking at. These exposures over time can harden or soften urethane. Therefore, if it hardens them, it's not a spec issue because there's no upper limit to how hard something can be in USBC. But there is a lower limit of how soft something can be in USBC. And as I've said, earlier, that is 72 on the durometer D scale in 10 spots. They average that out, and if it averages 72, then it's okay. This is not really the fault of the manufacturer, USBC, or even yourself. It's just that these chemicals have limitations, and in the bowling, in bowling, these limitations are pronounced by something like going out of spec. We subject these cover stocks to extreme compression. Every time it hits a bowling pin, it's compressing a little bit, and it hits the back of the lane where it goes off and goes into the ball return. It's actually hitting with some force, and that force can cause anything from micro fractures in the cover stock, when micro fractures, which can't be seen by the human eye, and require specialized equipment to actually see them and distinguish them, can make these cover stocks softer. Under the durometer test scenario, chemicals can soften them, can often soften urethane over time. Even though they are approved chemicals, over time they still can soften these materials, just because these, once again, are organic or are organic in nature, and anything organic breaks down over time, and especially if you add chemicals to it or do something like that. Now, I'm not implying that the chemicals or microfractures are the cause of these problems that we're seeing, these challenges that we're seeing at USBC, because they're still being investigated. USBC doesn't have an answer for us yet, and there's extensive testing that's going to occur over the next few months and few years to try to figure out what's really kind of going on in there. There may be other factors like heat or sunlight that, or just the properties of the urethane itself that may be at cause here. Heat is something that's particularly interesting to me, because heating urethane makes the ball softer, at least temporarily. However, it can change things at a molecular level too. Once again, organic materials tend to be a little bit more volatile than inorganic materials. Urethane is a relatively low melting point, as some urethanes can be as low as 98 C. Yeah, apparently I had a bit of dyslexia here. The temperature is 89 C, not 98 C. Temperature melting point of some of these can be as low as 89 C, which is even lower than what I just said. So that's below boiling temperature of water, which is 100 C. as with all materials, as they get closer to their melting temperature, they get softer in in how their appearance is and what you can do with them. They become more malleable, as we would call them. That's where that's like a softer feel to it. So many times when these materials return to normal temperatures, which is normal operating range and testing temperatures, most of them will return to the same hardness. However, some of them may get harder and others may remain soft depending on the chemical composition and makeup and what was used to make the balls. This is why I stressed temperature control so heavily in my previous video talking about ball crack prevention. If you haven't watched it, I strongly suggest you click below. If you go down below, you'll find it in the show notes. You'll find that, and if you click and watch it, it'll explain a lot more detail of what's going on with these things. Sunlight may also play a role in this. While urethane and polyurethanes are not affected by visible light for the most part, they can be affected by UV light. Urethane and polyurethanes are UV resistant. Once again, that does not mean that they are not affected by UV light. It just means that light that they're resistant in the fact that that it takes more exposure to UV light to have some chemical reactions go on. UV light and visible light are very different because UV light is a much higher energy than regular visible light that we see. Exposure can have an effect on these materials, and we don't know exactly, because the testing takes so long, we're not exactly sure what kind. Is it going to make it harder? Is it going to make it softer? In some cases with your resins, your reactive resins and such, it'll make them harder. In other cases with polyurethanes, it actually may make them softer. It just depends on the chemical composition, what they put in it, to make them get the reaction, to make them do the things that they want them to do, to make them have the properties that they want that particular ball to have and that cover stock to have. Urethane absorbs UV light. When it absorbs UV light, it loosens some of the chemical bonds, and the light in general increases the temperature of the cover stock. So you have two possible effects from this. You're going to heat the ball up, and you're going to bring it closer to its melting point, and at the exact same time that you're softening it by bringing it closer to its melting point, you're also introducing higher energy light from the sun, because the sun has a lot of UV light. Now, the sun produces quite a bit of different light. Visible light is not a problem for most urethane. It's the UV light, UVA, UVB, that are extremely dangerous to organic compounds, which urethane is. Urethane and polyurethane are both organic compounds. The total amount of UV light out of all the light that's emitted by the sun is really just about 7%. 7% of the total light is what we get. But yet, when we're out on the beach or outside somewhere, we wear a lot of sunscreen, and those sunscreens are specifically for UV light. UV light is very dangerous to your skin, and it has a very similar effect on any organic compound like urethane and polyurethane. So ball maintenance, keep balls out of sunlight is pretty important, regardless of if this is actually the cause of the situation we're having with softening with the urethane and polyurethane balls. Because of that, what ends up happening is what can end up happening. I'm not saying that this is actually happening. What can end up happening is that these chemical bonds can be broken, making the ball durometer test softer, and that can be a problem. It makes other chemical reactions that are not intended chemical reactions. It can make them take place or help them and aid them in taking place. Once again, I'm not claiming this is the reason for the failure of urethane balls, but giving you a little context for the current issue. In other words, just kind of keep your balls out of the sunlight and any UV source. that's kind of a good idea for all around. What I'm saying right now is that ball care and storage are very important. Until USBC can give us some findings as to what these balls are doing, what's going on within these balls to get them out of spec, the only thing we can do as bowlers and individuals is to take preventative measures as best we can. So watch my video below to learn what measures I take to keep some of this kind of stuff from happening. So if you like this video, give us a thumbs up, share it with your friends on social media, and place comments below. And subscribe to this channel for new videos on the sport of bowling. And until next time, keep them rolling. Say bye, CJ.
Alright.